first of all, a big hello to all the Waseda students. At least this is, I think, Chris, we had the pleasure of Chris you Zoom bombing us in class last week, and but I haven't had an opportunity to say hello to all of the Waseda guys at SILS there. So it's really actually exciting for me to not just be doing this with Chris, but also to be doing this with you guys at Waseda as well, and to be joining you guys with some of my students here from Sophia, putting you all together. So I did actually several years ago, did a master's degree at Waseda.
Several years ago.
Several years ago. Many severals ago in the School of Commerce, or the Graduate School of Commerce, just across the way.
They're beneath us, by the way.
Well,
physically, they're on 12 and 13. We're in 14.
Is that right? Is still in that graduate building that my professor, my supervisor at the time, Professor Kiyoshi Nakamura, used to refer to as the prison. So for very much, it's kind of almost kind of drab, very concrete, facade, and kind of dark hallways. But several years later, actually, I was actually teaching for a few years. In fact, teaching introduction to marketing at SILS for about 3 years before I moved at the time to Kyoto into Doshisha Business School, and that kind of precluded me teaching, continuing to teach there. That was very much pre-COVID. And the idea that you might actually run a class online at the time was unthinkable.
Yeah.
Of course. And so that was, in a sense, the last formal, relationship that I've had with Waseda. But that move to Kyoto was actually a big inflection point for me, because that actually allowed me to give me ready access. In fact, it surrounded me with various different, let's say, aspects, not just of Japanese culture, but of, let's say, traditional craft of very old kind of shinise, firms who have been around for hundreds, of years, in some cases. In Tokyo, if you hear of a sandaime, a third generation company, you think, "Whoa, that's an old company." But in Kyoto, usually if at the Chamber of Commerce meetings, and if someone says, "Oh, you're sandaime, I'm the third generation of this," and they say, "Oh, how cute! You're only the third generation. You're the third generation. Oh, you're spring chicken. You're such a young company." Right? So. A lot of history, but also a lot of let's say pride, and a lot of emphasis placed on process, placed on craft, and the realization that as much effort or emphasis that, say, an artisan or an individual small firm can place on craft, that's often not enough to communicate, right, the value of that craft to people that have no idea what it's about, right? The necessity to, because many of us, well, most of us are not really experts, when it comes to, let's say, the kind of the tangible, in terms of kind of physical items. If I can just spring up here and knock over a light here, but how this might be the, whether it's, working on pewter.
I was just about to reach for some of my own, and Akari-san in the class is close, I believe, close family friends with the artisan who made it.
Right. So from Seikaido, or this kind of tea canister from Kaikado, that you probably as a student, or in fact even as you might think, wow, that is that is quite a quite an impressive sum of to spend on a tea canister just to store tea, right? But being able to communicate sure, there's a lot of tangible elements that have gone into something like this in terms of creating it by hand, but there's a lot about the non-functional, right, elements of this that add so much more to the value, and really being able to decide, well, which aspects of this need to be communicated. How can we actually communicate what is valuable, right, in that, and kind of bundle that and communicate to someone. That's actually something that many firms, despite having superior skills and an incredibly long history and heritage, still actually struggle to do. Right? And so that's something that has really, given me an interest, not just in the craft and in the heritage itself, but actually in the need to determine, well, what's relevant for contemporary markets, for contemporary needs, what's going to be fitting for global markets, not just in Japan, but for global markets. And how can you actually come up with a way to communicate, to come up with to reconceptualize, to transform, how we might consider the value of these things, that they're not just old things that lie around your grandparents' house unused, but they're something that you might want to have on your shelf at home, or you might want to use.
Right. And
or the touch it. They want you to touch it daily.
By the way, several times I've seen that in your office and been really tempted to steal it from you. I want to add that to my collection. I think everyone will get a better sense of the structure of the topics over the next couple of weeks, hearing what Adam just said there, because our topic next week is authenticity. And then the subsequent week is rebranding and transformational communications. You shouldn't fall into the trap of thinking that transformational communications means coming up with a completely different story. Very often it's about coming up with a conscious communication strategy or design communications, which actually makes your story that is so familiar to yourself that you don't even bother telling it anymore. It's your internal story, and it's your embodied knowledge, and it's so much of the ambience around you that you take it for granted. And often you need to bring outsiders in, or at very least to have a kind of a communication design methodology to think about, well, what is it that we do that is so special? That we completely take it for granted, and we forget to tell people about it. And once you explain it to people, or maybe show it to people, and this is the great power of visualization, isn't it? That people can understand the value. And my showing off mine. Adam, you were with me when I bought these. Remember, we discovered the store by 2010. Adam and I were down in Kyoto. We were there for 2012. No, 2012 wasn't it? It was the ACEI conference, the Cultural Economics Conference. We were down there together, and we had a little bit of time, and we decided to go for a nice walk, and then we discovered this just magnificent store, and these are both two of the rather iconic products. And we met the Akari could help us, the owner of the business, and remarkably charming. Akari, can we bring you in straight away?
Yamanaka-san, right? Yamanaka Jinpei.
Yes.
Genbei. His name in as a craftsman's Genbei-san.
Genbei-san.
Right. Genbei-san.
Right.
In 2012, he might be calling himself Junpei. Yet he started to brand himself in recent years.
Oh.
Before, he might just be simply Junpei.
Wow. Right. And of course, you know him very, very well, right?
Yeah.
So what generation is he?
I think his company is still young. Second or third.
Oh, okay, right.
I'll have to check.
Right. So okay, so a relative newcomer. Right. So for some reason I thought that was older, but anyway, one of the things that really impressed me, because I love this too much to actually use it. I'm thinking I have to buy another one to use it all the time.
Exactly.
But it's a very, very distinctive Japanese craft, metalwork, where just sit there and tap away. And there is the video on the website, and you can see this. And I think it's a really beautiful video. It's not narrated. You just see the craftsman just tap, 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 and creating this very, very distinctive effect. This of course with the metalwork, but then also having the very fine, I guess this is very fine bamboo as well. So bringing together the very organic material and the inorganic metal for me is something that's very beautiful. But also because I have a particular love of mid-century Danish furniture. Someone like Poul Kjærholm very strikingly made these gorgeous bits of furniture with metal frames and using very, very nice rope tied just around metal to create a chair, which gives this deceptive sense of lightness. And so the sensibility, of course, the theorists or the art critics or whatnot, they can explain why these things appear so beautiful to us. What is it about certain treatments with metal, for example, that take something which is very heavy and give it the deceptive appearance of lightness, because this looks remarkably, it suggests the attribute of lightness. But we're not trained to talk about a sensibility, even if we actually happen to have it. And I'm not inserting myself in that particular sensibility. I wish I could claim that. We see that in some fields where they've had a very strong imperative to communicate, partly for regulatory reasons, and again, Adam is an expert on this. For example, in the wine industry in France, with regional appellations, they've had to develop a vocabulary or a discourse, right, to talk about the particular attributes of their product and the particular ways of making it, and to inscribe this in a set of rules. You can't call this champagne unless it's made with certain ingredients in a certain way and in a certain place. But in many other fields, there aren't those narrative strategies. So people literally, although they all know it and assume it, they've never really developed as a story, let alone thought about how to share that story, have they, Adam?
Right, and I think that also, we can see that in the tensions when one country, or in the case of the EU now, we all might agree by the same rules, but when you take these products into global markets, people in other countries might not be so willing to agree with them, and we see, ironically, one country that is in most cases a very strong protector or proponent of intellectual property rights, in this case is not at all, is the US, and still likes to find ways, for example, around to say, well, this is it is from California, but let's call it Californian champagne, and the like. So, or this beef has never even been in Japan, but let's call it Kobe beef, or the like. So so there's
and cheeses and so many other things, and they're and our country, Australia too, at the moment is kind of locked in a battle with the EU in terms of pinning down an EU free trade agreement, and it's really battling over, before they can sign off, it comes down to a few really basic issues about cheeses and is it made in a way that was traditionally made in Cyprus, for example. So we'll explore a lot of those issues.
Just to get back to a previous point, Chris, about what you're saying about not knowing your own story and being too consumed, or being too familiar to you about, in order to create that story that's needed to communicate to external parties, to potential customers, to potential investors, even to the public at large. Is that quite often, what we'll find is that when outsiders do come in and take a look, that rather than going forward, they also do need to go back, right? They actually quite often go back to the roots of what the brand, or what the original essence of that company was, and really drill down. And then, well, actually, we need to bring some of these back. These are things that have been forgotten or left behind, and that is then also really something that I think in this project we'll be wanting you to do as well.
Exactly.
That really going back and taking a look at the history, right, of, I think in the document, as Chris has mentioned to to you guys at Waseda earlier, that both forward looking but also backward looking doesn't seem good, but
No, but it is. It's you look
but
backwards to look forwards. Yeah.
I think you will, universities, I think, really try to rely on that history a lot, but I think it's something that, in order to understand the ethos and the essence of what is being communicated about the campus, on the campus, I think that is going to be a really critical part of what you will all need to do as a part of your respective projects.
Absolutely, and that's why we've got this very substantial document here, everyone, which really, it talks about the history of the universities. Originally, we thought about just giving you a bunch of links. Oh, by the way, we're going to update. Oh, I still haven't updated that. I said I'd do that. I'm sorry. I said them to Adam, but I haven't updated them on Moodle on our side. So I thought we'd send you some links, but it's kind of a bit overwhelming sometimes, to be throwing so many links and being told to just make sense of them. So that we thought the better thing to do was to come up with a document which kind of sets this historical context and really thinks about how, as the turn of phrase we have here, that the university awkwardly inhabits the present, is much more comfortable in referencing the past and referencing the future. But the present is always awkward because there are so many different demands on the university itself. But also, how do you strike this balance between the backward-looking and the forward-looking elements? I would say, by the way, in terms of also explaining what you do, universities have historically done this very badly. People who become professors, they go through this elaborate process of master's degrees, PhDs, teaching assistants, maybe research fellowships and whatnot. And in the process, you pick it up what it is about the university. It's the research and it's the administration, it's the community service, it's the teaching. But most of what we seem to be doing by the broader community is just the teaching side. You only experience a small part of that. And I think collectively universities have failed to explain the basic logic of why you actually put research and teaching together in one institution. And a lot of people cynically say, well, you use our fees to cross-fund, to cross-subsidize research. There is some truth in that, but do you really want to be taught by people who are not looking to be at the frontier of knowledge creation? So yes, that is the quid pro quo. Okay, that is exactly what you're getting. It's in the high school. By the way, high schools are generally in a lot of countries more expensive than universities, which is an interesting kind of paradox. But this going back in terms, dipping into your own tradition, your own heritage to create new product to refresh your brand. I want to just briefly mention one example because Adam was directly involved with it as well too, and that is the case of Nissan. Now, of course, Nissan in recent years has been in the news because of Carlos Ghosn, and Ghosn is well and truly gone. Boom, boom. You've heard that gag too many times, but I was in his office. And at the time, his chief of staff seemed to be quite comfortable with me being in his office when he wasn't there. It became pretty clear soon afterwards why he was relaxed about that. He didn't expect that the boss would be inhabiting that office very often. Subsequently, that he was already kind of alert to what was happening. But I have for years in SILS been teaching the Nissan corporate case study, which had a very high level of support. In fact, it was an initiative that came about when Carlos Ghosn met former Waseda President Shirai, and they said, let's do something together. And they looked around, and the person who put the hand up, and said, oh, yep, okay, I'll take this on. This sounds fun, was myself. And it's a long history of doing this. And Adam helped me out enormously because I went on sabbatical for a year, talk about Kenku Kikan, to Israel. And Adam very kindly took that over and looked after it. And we went to Hombu together out there in Nissan. And so Adam too met some of the key executives who really turned around the Nissan brand, working with Carlos Ghosn. They were people like Noguchi Kyohei-san, who as well as being a Keio graduate, unfortunately, for a while actually had a successful band and did a whole bunch of interesting things, and is very much identity and branding community in Japan, and went on to Lixil and various other things. But he and people like the former chief creative officer, Shiro Nakamura, so the chief designer, they explicitly looked into Nissan's heritage and saw what were the really iconic Nissan products, and to revitalize the brand were going to be doing that. Okay, so the Z, for example, very explicitly channeled 240Z, an iconic car that really boosted the Nissan brand in the United States. And students in my class have already had the full quarter equivalent, already seen the image. Nissan has its own heritage gallery. It has a big warehouse with all these iconic cars in the past that it's made over its long history. And new employees, and particularly those who will be in designing or branding, they go and spend time there. You know, they sit in the old cars, they look at them, they really get a sense for the form, the materiality, and then do a deep dive into past brand stories. And on my website, and we'll share as well with the Sophia guys, you see this with Nissan, that they have a very interesting legacy, not just of product design, but of corporate communications. And they've been able to reference that from time to time with some of their creative communications. And so what we're doing here is inviting students to do the same with your university, to directly engage with the stories that the universities have told it themselves about the nature of the campus and the campus experience, and how they've used images of the campus. And we had a Q&A session before this session started, and some very good questions. And of course, there's a plethora of new and old media representations of our universities, whether it's university guides, mass media, even the cultural industries, even in novels and movies, universities figure, for example. New media, people constantly tweeting and whatnot. By the way, one interesting thing, this has direct implications with how we run entrance exams. I can't go into detail about running entrance exams, but some of you might remember seeing me in a room, as I'm sure Sophia students will remember seeing Professor Johns. We stand out, right? And I always have first year students come up to me saying, "I remember you." And I always say, "And I remember you, and I'm so glad to see you again." I'm normally lying because there are hundreds of people in the room, but I'm very grateful for the people who come. But one of the interesting things we had was we almost but didn't have a glitch in a very big room I was in, but not responsible for 2 years ago. And then in the lunch break, it was just a little bit slow to hand out the exams. And anyway, it happened and it was okay. In the lunch break, there was an emergency meeting held to discuss the fact that several of the Jukensei had tweeted, it could have been dangerous. They looked like they almost forgot to hand us the exams, but it worked out okay in the end. And so I, for the first time, realized that we actually, over in Hombu, for the entrance exams, we actually have a social media listening team, watching in real time how the conduct of our entrance exams are actually being reported. I don't know, maybe we outsource this to a third-party company to track this. But we are so sensitive to perceptions of any kind of screw up, and it would have been a completely trivial thing because it delayed the start the exam by 3 minutes. We could have finished it by 3 minutes, but anyway, we didn't even have to do it. But it was obviously trending in social media, and I realized then just how scary, from an organizational point of view, social media can be, just simply because your reputation is being made and remade in real time. And the strangest thing was then going back into the room where there was 300 people there, and I'm thinking, who was on Twitter? Who are the bloggers, right? Who made that particularly nasty comment? I don't know. So we were told, of course, to be completely poker faced. It's completely within their rights to say, you know, sakera no waseda, about something that wasn't even a problem. Okay, and I realized the anonymity, and this also, I've discussed this in a video that I posted overnight as well too. Anonymity is a particularly scary thing. That you can take on a completely different persona in the social media space, and you can kind of say whatever you want and misrepresent the institution. So there's a whole lot of tactical issues about how organizations will present themselves and then respond to misrepresentations. And so one of our later topics that we're going to be talking about is discontent and crisis communications. Because a lot of the crisis communications is actually about responding to non-crises that are being presented as crises. Okay, Adam, any thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking because I mean, I think one of the critical issues there is if it were all, let's say, contained, kind of self-contained criticism within one particular social media platform. You might find that perhaps more traditional institutions like universities or maybe big, big old companies might not care so much, perhaps. Yeah. Of course, the thing is that it's not just contained within one social media platform, and in fact, the mass media or the traditional media are also very sensitive to this, and this kind of whole, I won't quite say an army, but a large number, huge number of anyone now can essentially report from from the field. And gemba kara, this kind of reporting from the field. Because that has posed challenges for traditional media, but it also makes it much easier for them to run a story and put it on the news about anything that, whether it's in the case that, that Krista, you were just talking about entrance exams, that suddenly, something that might take days to trickle into the media, and by then it's forgotten, is kind of an instant thing that can make headlines on the evening news. And so that's the case for universities with entrance exam, but it's the same, let's say, architecture, the same infrastructure exists for all number of companies and organizations.
Yeah, and it's funny you say architecture, because yesterday morning it was trending in media, in old media, reports for Nomura Fudosan with its Proud brand, that they have a building out in Kogane, a premium mansion, and it's got some structural problems. And suddenly that became a kind of a news story, and it did so largely because owners were dissatisfied apparently with the response of the company and had taken to social media to criticize. And we know, and particularly in the Australian context, you want to get someone's attention very quickly. You only have to put a story about real estate in Sydney, that's the one thing that gets high rates of views. Things in the Japanese case, university screw ups are kind of number one. Apartment blocks that are in danger of kind of collapsing if there's an earthquake, even though I'm sure that's not the case there, is another way to get people's attention. In one of the videos for this week, Earning Attention, that I've just posted, I talk a little bit about this. The really important point that actually, as Adam just said, the old media and the new media are in a very deeply symbiotic relationship. Yes, new media presents a challenge to old media in terms of getting people to subscribe, for example. But exactly as Adam said, it's never been easier for journalists to write copy. I have an undergraduate degree in journalism, and Adam did media studies as well as business. And in the old days, I did work experience in newspapers, and actually the first time I did it was actually as a year 10 student at what was the Sun, the Daily Sun and the Sunday Sun in Brisbane. And as a 15-year-old being told to go and interview people, and that was quite an intimidating thing as a 15-year-old going to interview the local, department store manager about, rates of theft or something like that. You actually had to get off your bum, go outside with a notebook, listen very carefully, take notes, and people used to learn shorthand so they could take notes reliably as well. These days, of course, if you want to write a story and you want an alternative opinion, all you need to do is just search by hashtags. And so, any maniac, for example, out there who thinks that they've been particularly badly treated by Waseda can just on a, Waseda sucks on kind of hashtag, and bang, you're going to get this kind of critical opinion. So journalists can find disgruntled people relatively easily, whereas in the past you really had to, you'd have to sample 100 strangers in a public square at lunchtime before you found someone who had a critical opinion of the university, right? You can go directly to them these days. And then by reporting on them, you actually elevate the influence of their voice, which actually encourages so many more people to become influencers in the first place. People only think about becoming an influencer because they actually see other people being able to do this and realize this power to escalate your voice extraordinarily if you can just simply get attention, and so there is this incredible temptation to go for shock and awe, to try and get buzz, to get attention. And I've also put a video up there about buzz. Okay. Just one note I noticed, Akari, thank you very much for the message. I actually said about Seikado that actually it turned out it was even older than we all thought. Established in 1789, okay? So it's probably about 8th or 9th generation. 1789. What happened in 1789? Can anyone tell us what happened in 1789 other than the Seikado? Sekaishi no 1789. What happened in 1789? I don't know. Put it in chat. There's a bonus mark. Anyone? 1789年に何があったんでしょう? Yes, thank you very much. Okay, I'm glad to see that some people paid attention. The French Revolution. Now you think about this. This is Bastille Day, 1789. This is central to the French Republic's foundational story, and they're on the fifth Republic, right? Okay, and then you've got this artisanal business in Kyoto, which dates back to the same time. Okay, now there's actually, I think, a very interesting creative communications intervention you might actually do there to kind of to emphasize that there. Okay, so yeah, knowing your story and projecting it. I think all of us have experiences of underwhelmed audiences. When we've made a great effort to do something, for example, and you then show to people what you've done. Maybe you have this at home, you spend all day tidying up. Maybe this, Adam and I seem to complain too much about this all the time. We rearrange the kitchen, we completely, we design think the entire household, and we make it work so much. Both of us are, no, forget the ike bit, right? But both of us are kind of house organizing obsessives. And I think both of us have the experience of, you make great efforts on the home front, and your beloved comes home and you go, look what I've done to the kitchen cupboards. 7 hours of effort, and they go, oh yeah. It's like, deeply exasperating. Okay. Adam?
It's kind of like a a dog digging a hole in the backyard, isn't it? Well, good for you.
Yeah. Right. That's a nice.
Well, no, actually, there's a classic Australian movie called The Castle, where actually one of the sons, that's one of the things he does, run into his dad intermittently throughout the movie, and Dad, I've dug another hole, trying to show off to the dad how helpful he's being is kind of something that it reminds me of. But,
and it completely fails to resonate. So yeah, so this is just one of the fundamental communication challenges that the more something is refined, the less the effort is clear. Okay. I remember doing my PhD, and Adam did his PhD as well at Australian National University. And my senpai at the time, when I did my first PhD presentation, in progress presentation, he always had a brutal way with words. This was Luke Gower, who went on to, well, he's got very serious roles at one point, head of risk for Commonwealth Bank and whatnot. But I remember he just said, in response to my highly theorized, pretentious thesis, he just said, still too many signs of the struggle. Okay, you're still, trying too hard. I can still all the traces of the struggle. It doesn't look neat and beautiful and polished. And of course, in the context of the Olympics and swimming and whatnot, we all have a sense of this, that if we look at a really good athlete at work, they have put enormous amounts of effort into what they do, and they really make it look effortless. The problem is when you get to such a high level of performance, when something just works, when it really does look effortless, human beings, precisely because we are so quick to adapt, okay, we're updating our stories, it makes us resilient, but we also just completely get used to the ease that has been brought about. Every bit of good design very quickly generates disinterest in the hard work that brought it about, precisely because it looks so much easier than it actually was. And it just becomes part of, as Alfred Lord Whitehead very famously said, part of those things that we can do without thinking about them. And he very famously said that civilization advances by doing this, that the more things we can automate in a way, simply leaves us more time to think about other things and to do new things. But it also means that we just don't take, or we don't stop to think about the effort that's been put into something. So we get these beautiful artisanal items like this. People go, oh yeah, that's nice. Okay. And unless you actually conjure up a sense of intangible value, to use, Ogilvy Vice Chairman Rory Sutherland's narrative there, the real sense of what goes into making something look so good, then people are simply not going to value it. So communications becomes just critical in so many domains, telling your stories about how you are actually adding value. Okay, now what we would like to do, Adam, good timing wise, shall we throw people into groups? No, throw makes it sound easy. It's going to be a bit of a drawn out mechanical process here, actually, because we're going to have to assign you to groups, okay? And I just want to check everybody has their either S or their W. Terrific. Good. Okay. So if you haven't already, I'm seeing a few of the Waseda folks. I know your names. If you could put a W in front of your name, just so we know that you are definitely a Waseda student, and likewise the Sophia students. And I understand, Adam, on your side, you've got some students, because it's a new quarter, who might just be joining today, so you don't actually know their names yet. So it's very important that the Waseda students have identified themselves as such. Okay. Now, Adam, by the way, I have realized that I haven't made you co-host. So okay. So, right. Well, I might do the breakout groups on this end, but then you can help me then with the manual assigning, hey? And what did we said 18, didn't we? So
actually, it looks like, well, I've counted about 21 Sophia students at the moment, so that
make the groups a bit smaller, you think?
Make the groups, yeah.
And one Sophia student to each group. So
what do you think?
Okay, well, shall we go for 20 groups? Okay, how about 20 breakout groups? Mass education. Okay. So we'll Okay, so we manually generate them and then we move some folks around. Adam, maybe you want to start at the top and I'll start from the bottom and move some folks.
Actually, I won't. Just I don't think I will be able to see it until you've until it's
actually open.
Open, perhaps.
Oh, really? Okay.
I think my sense is it might all be done on the local device until you kind of hit the open.
Okay. Well, bear with me just a moment. Adam, well, why don't you keep the folks engaged?
Right.
And I particularly, what I'd like to draw you out on is your own thoughts on I've only ever worked for one Japanese university, Waseda. So you've been at Rikyo, Doshisha, and now Sophia. We don't want to color too much the conversations are going to happen, because we're going to ask people to come up with, just simply list individual words, an ideating kind of exercise, both Nihongo and Eigo demo daijoubu. Your impressions of Sophia, Waseda, Keio, and Tokyo University, and I'll put this in chat in a moment. But while I do this, maybe Adam, you can share your own thoughts about maybe Rikyo and Doshisha. What was similar? What was different? And maybe in reference to, but you also know Waseda and you also know Sophia. So you've been across 4 different institutions in total.
Right. Right, indeed, and actually we've also both, I think, had a stint at Keio, although. Oh yeah,
of course. Oh God, I forgot. Hang on, yeah. I taught at Keio for 6 years. I mean, mentally, that's God Almighty, that's damning, isn't it? I know. I was very conscious of it now that Keio has announced that they're actually doing vaccinations, because until Sangatsu 31 Nichi, I was technically Hijokin at Keio, and so would have been eligible for a vaccination. But no. So yes, no, I completely forgot about the Keio angle. So anyway, over to yourself, Nat, while I do this.
But no, I think something that, again, as Chris, as you said, I don't want to color the conversation too much, and I don't want to directly draw, or, we're going to ask all of you to essentially to do a bit of a brainstorming, or a bit of a session where you are collectively pooling your impressions, when you hear of particular institutions, what comes to mind, right? And I think some of them might be, let's say, positive, some of them might be negative. Some of them could be what some might call coloring, or personality-based attributes that aren't necessarily strongly hierarchical from a top to bottom rank, or a positive or a negative, but more in a kind of a horizontal sense. Differentiate one particular institution from another as well. And so I think obviously there's a lot, as we've talked about, a lot of heritage aspects. And so when we've already mentioned these 4 places to you now, right? Waseda-Sophia, Keio, and Todai, or Tokyo University. And so I think probably my sense is that the first thing that would come to your minds might be particularly those of you who are, let's say, I'm not sure if you have any first years there in Yoshio, Chris, but I think in my class, the second, so I think only from second years. And so when you first enter an institution, I think, things like Hensachi is probably might still be fresh in your mind, but that is something that actually fades with, or it should fade, and with time. And I'd like to think that if you're, if you're still thinking about university rankings and the like, by way of Hensachi as a 3rd year or a 4th year, I think it's probably going to make you a much less interesting candidate for job hunting, if that's all that you're bringing to the table, right? So
I'll just interrupt and say I think SIL's students have understood that Waseda really is pinky. after one semester and you look around and you think, how did this idiot get in? you pretty quickly realize that the hen such a thing is not a particularly good kind of indicator of inherent talent. You've got some absolutely brilliant people, and you think, hang on, shouldn't this person be at
Right.
Harvard or MIT or something like that? And you've got someone else thinking,
just to kind of prime the pump, hopefully, to prime your, again, in terms of what ways, you might be thinking. And so, ironically, as Chris, mentioned, having a history of teaching at Rikyo, at Doshisha, and now at Sophia, all of them being these kind of so-called, kind of mission school or Catholic or Christian, schools, and many people that I meet say, oh, you must be a strong believer or something. That's a criteria that you're using to choose universities, and well, actually, that is purely coincidental. But in terms of those institutions and their, let's see, how they see themselves, how they speak about themselves, how important is that for, let's say, the history? How important is that as an element of the particular brand that they put into the market, and that they communicate is that aspect of their heritage or their origin story. Something that not just for universities but for all brands, we talk about origin as a really important communication tool, to talk about where you're from, how you got started, where the product comes from, and the like. And so, but you might find that there's probably, despite what an institution might say about themselves, how much of that is the thing, or one of the main things that people that we remember or think about intuitively about those universities, about those institutions, when we hear the name, when we hear someone is from that institution. And so, part of this exercise that we want you to do today is to really, again, don't hold back, all right? Don't self-censor. Well, don't be nasty, but don't be unnecessarily nasty. But we do encourage you to come up with as many ideas as you can, all right, of what you intuitively or reflexively, I should say, think of when you hear these institutions, because later on, and this is again an important part of the communication, have both an audit, of a brand, but also to determine what an institution or a company or brand is saying about itself and what people are actually believing, and quite often that there is a distinctive gap between the two of them, and that becomes an area where communication experts or communication or rebranding or like need to often be kind of plugging that hole. It's not, as Chris mentioned earlier, it's not always about coming up with an entirely new concept. It's about realizing which aspects should we focus on in our communication, and how can we better or more effectively communicate the things that we would like to.
Absolutely, and that's a roadmap to all of our topics right through to the end of the semester. Okay, now we're set, so we're going to throw into the groups. Okay, it's a really short, straightforward ideating exercise. First of all, everyone put your cameras on. When you get into your groups, say hi, and then just give us words. What are your impressions of universities? And I'll put them in the chat here. Okay. So Waseda-Sophia, Keio, and Todai, Tokyo University. Okay. And just words. Okay. Just imagine you've got these stickets like you can see on Adam's wall behind him there. Ever the design thinking guy. Okay. Everyone gets ideated. Okay. And 日本語の英語でも本当に日本語の大体日本の大学に対しての印象はね、やはり日本語でね、出てくるので、so because you're in virtual groups, I imagine use your maybe your chat there to share the ideas, or just say them. And we need one person from each group to capture those ideas, and then we come back to the big room what we want you to do is to post them into chat. Okay? So 一人が出た言葉を基本的にリストアップして、戻ったら、そこのチャットに直接にポストしてください。Okay, and then so we'll have a look through them, we'll briefly reference them, then we'll throw you back into the group and ask you where your ideas are coming from. So do it pretty fast. Okay, it is, you know, get a bit of momentum, stream of consciousness, throw them out there. Okay, so just take what, 10 minutes and see how we go, and we'll come you back and we'll bring you back, and then we'll put you back into the groups again. Okay,
but please don't forget to keep an eye on your time as well. You might even want to have someone, or if all of you don't know how to use a stopwatch, at least have someone in your group that is keeping an eye on the amount of time that you have left. I think would be a really important thing.
Right.
To
Good. So we'll give you 10 minutes from now. Okay, so opening the rooms. Wow, let's scroll through the ideas. Well, Adam, I'm looking at our time. I'm thinking maybe we save up the next part of the exercise. Where do we get our impressions from? Do you want to save that as a warm up for next week?
Yeah, I think
because
work well.
Yeah, I think probably, and I'm primarily guilty of this. Too much enthusiasm for all the issues that I was pondering half the night, recording those videos and everything and talking about with you. And I think if we do it that way, then that's a nice opening into the discussions about authenticity, as we touched on earlier, particularly when I was interacting with students on my side before your students joined us. This maybe the gap between the individual experience and popular kind of external constructs and perceptions as a nice way of exploring authenticity. Okay, folks, everyone scroll through the chat, okay, and let's see what we've got here, okay. So Waseda, diverse, international, big community. Yeah, well, it's big for a start, isn't it? Okay. I think that's something that a lot of people miss. Fundamental point about Waseda. It's a very large scale university. And, you know, when Adam and I talk about this, we realize the difference in this, that that's why you're always tripping over Waseda graduates, because there's just so many of them. Okay. For better and for worse. Okay, smaller community in Sophia, more boutique, graceful, smart, right, terrific, more females than males. There's a very interesting hint here, though, in terms of sub-brands, because School of International Liberal Studies, SILS in Waseda, the gender balance is rather more female than in many faculties. In fact, I had a theory that, you know, my daughter falling in love with an engineer, someone from Nikko Gakubu, kind of happened precisely because there are not many women over there. And so the engineers are actually not very discerning. That's why we put up with my daughter. That was my cynical, and that was her own narrative on that herself too. So obviously there are very different subcultures within a large institution. Okay. The party image, that actually seems to be a common trope, doesn't it, across both Waseda and Sophia here, and this is something we can explore. KO boys, Todai nerds, okay. Right, KO, elite, unique, pride, okay. Georgie, religious, smaller, interconnected, interestingly. Todai, smart, the best, okay. Right, kings of Todai and queens, okay. Good. Some people are very clearly picked up on this, on the scale issues straight away. This is a very interesting one, and this will be critical to what you think about yourselves with your own positioning, the campus experience, and the boutique experience of being in a smaller institution, for example. Right. Okay. I think what we'll do is, and just so that there's no glitches, let me immediately save the chat here. And how about I edit all of these up and we'll share them with everyone, and you can look at these impressions. And then as a warm up next week, we'll then put you into breakout groups and we'll get you to think about this question, and we have it ready to run here. Where do you get your perceptions from? This, I think, is a great bit of homework for all of us that very much aligns with the assigned project. どうしてこの4つの大学についてる印象があんなに強いのか、どこからそういう影響とか受けてるとか。So does it come from your senpai, from high school? Does it come from magazines? Does it come from mass culture? Does it come from social media? Does it come from the very images that the institutions use themselves to communicate and project themselves? I think there's a little bit of everything there. And I think we need to explore that. And this is really what a lot of boutique branding consultancies do when you're thinking about a branding strategy, particularly if you're using more, say, semiotics approach. And already students in my class are a little bit familiar with semiotics, where you analyze the world as signs, messages, and that are made up with a whole range of signs, and we have a lot of visual cues. For example, the mass media, whenever they do a report about universities, all they need to do is just simply show an image of the statue of Okama or Waseda Corridor, Okama Corridor, for example. So the auditorium there, or the Akamon, or the head office at Tordai. So we have these just simple images that they can show, which immediately has kind of cultural currency. If you had the sound down on the TV and you saw those images, you know it's a story about universities. Or it's a story about a university professor being arrested, okay? A Waseda professor being arrested in scandalous circumstances. That might be the only other possibility. And so we tend to, our eyes tend to go straight to it. Normally because the professors are fearing, oh my God, who's been arrested now, okay? Unfortunately, recently it's been still a student, but anyway. So yeah, that is an unfortunate truth. I've already mentioned this before, that if you get arrested with 3 mates from universities with a much lower hensachi, you'll be guaranteed in the Japanese media to be reported as Sodai Seira, okay? So Waseda and other students arrested. And I know this painfully because it's happened repeatedly to Waseda, okay? One of the arguments is because so many people who work in the media are Waseda graduates, and Waseda didn't treat them very well. So they like to pick up on bad news about Waseda, okay? I'd be very interested to hear next week perceptions from Sophia students and whether they think the media, for example, fairly represents them. Okay, so where do you get your perceptions from? Let's have a think about that for next week. We will share this hugely interesting list that we have here, okay? And also as a primer for next week too, we just like you to get to thinking about your own digital media footprint. This was another task we intend to do. We'll do a little quiz next week just to see what social media you're on. And this is in terms of the framework that I talk about in the evolving media presentation and set of slides that both students in Sophia and Waseda will have available. With the rise of a whole range of digital media platforms, the choices between paid, owned, and earned media for anyone, any business has evolved significantly, but also for every individual. You really have this, not the paid media, but the owned media. Do you have your own website, your own LinkedIn profile, your own maybe YouTube channel? All of these social media platforms can be used for your personal branding. So we'll take the measure of just of what people are using. And one of our conversations over a few weeks will be to take the lessons about digital communications and designing communications, and how we can apply this to yourselves as individuals. So as a bridge into next week's topic, and Adam is really going to be central to that because you're the authenticity guy. Adam, what's your kind of concluding message on this, in terms of getting people thinking about authenticity and their own digital presence?
Right. Yeah. Thanks, Chris. It's something that, well, I'd say we don't really think about much, but on the flip side, perhaps some of us might spend too much time thinking about it as well. Is this me, or how do I project myself? Should I put this on? Should I put this photo on Instagram, or this photo on Instagram, or is it? I think there's a lot of studies done in the US, at least, that show that with let's say teenagers, like if a particular post gets less than so many likes, they'll delete it from their profile because it's it's not, in that sense. Perhaps they feel that their brand, as a part of their brand, is being externally recognized as opposed to intrinsically or personally, a part of their story or their conversation and what they have to say about the world as well. And so this, I think, the one thing that we'll be asking you to engage with, and as Chris has got this question up for you to consider that we'll be kicking off on next week, about where do you get your perceptions from, and that again will be our entrance point to that will be with these institutions, with these universities, but also in terms of the your own personal digital media footprint and your digital media, your brand, your own personal brand, in terms of doing what we would call a brand audit, going through and taking a look at how you project yourself. And well, we'll go into this a little bit more detail next week, but there is an aspect of, well, what's the purpose? Why are you projecting yourself, and are you projecting yourself specifically to get a particular, for example, a job in a particular company, and therefore you think they want to see this, and this is what I will show.
I've really always been into insurance, right?
So I need to dress this as conservative as possible to show that I'm not. I kind of come up with a formula of an actuarial formula of what particular shade of necktie I should be wearing, today, or how much of your own personality, of your own kind of self that you actually want to or decide that you should be putting out. And that's quite a constant, not always a conscious, but a constant negotiation, I think, that many of that we are, I think, all in engaging in. And that's going to be relevant, again, for your own personal brand. And I think, we can see, again, and you might have talked about this in your class at Waseda, but, even in every time you appear in a Zoom class, when you turn your camera off, what's being shown. And I mean, you can see the blandness of mine. If I turn my camera off, you can see simply it's just my name.
I'm always telling people not to do that, actually.
Yeah, I know. Well, this is why I'm saying how bland it. My goodness, when was that photo taken?
Yeah, thanks, mate. Quite recently, and I've already told my intermediate seminar students this. Pay the 6,000 yen, go to Isetan, because I got that photograph taken for my Australian passport, which I renewed 2 years ago. And it was such a nice picture that was a waste. So I've been using it in other contexts. They are incredibly good, incredibly experienced at taking pictures. And so there's a whole bunch of people there who are getting pictures for Omiai profiles, for Shukatsu, and you pay a couple of thousand yen more, you can actually get the data file as well too. And it's kind of too good that I feel like sagishi. Okay. But whatever. The only mistake I made was that I wore my favorite summer shirt when I had the picture taken. And now I'm acutely aware that I should never wear that shirt when I'm in a Zoom meeting, because people are going to laugh with the kind of before after if it's the same shirt and I'm looking as bad as I am today. So yeah.
Right.
curate your
Right.
digital
So,
image.
yeah, so again, curating your appearance, and so all of these things, speak about you, and it could be about, and I can see, interestingly, many of you I can see have a particular image on your screens when you have your camera off. Some of you have chosen to picture your face or something that you're actively doing. Others who have chosen an image that I'm assuming, and I think many of us, speaks to a deep part of your personality or your personal preferences. That's something that is near and dear to you, that is part of your, let's call it, personal brand, or something that you want to communicate to people, regardless of whatever Zoom meeting you happen to go into. So that's again, I think, one aspect, but as we'll be talking about, across all of your different profiles, and this is, I guess, something that we'll go into more detail next week, but, is there a need, to what extent do you, something that we would talk about when we're talking about corporate brands, or organizational brands, is, in terms of coherence.
That's something I really want to tease out with you on that, and because we're always multifaceted, many dimensions to us, and we're talking to multiple constituencies, and other people know that, but at the same time, we do have to kind of articulate how it all hangs together in some way or another. So there is the art of presenting, unity in diversity, I guess, in terms of how it all does cohere as a story. You don't want to be what the old Japanese happo-bijin, kind of looking in every direction, in a way that actually undermines trust. And there is a bigger issue, and one we'll explore next week, and we would love to hear your opinions on it. We'll interact on it. Is the tension between personal authenticity, the being there in all your imperfections, actually makes all of the things you do that are good more believable. The worst thing you can do, in terms of undermining your credibility, is to shamelessly fake it and get caught out, because nothing you'll ever do will be credible again. On the other hand, we do know there is some truth in the fake it till you make it. There is always an aspirational component to communications. Companies as much say what they want to be as what they are, and then try to close the gap. They try and close into the story. The real problem is people just fake it and don't even bother trying to make it, okay? So the aspirational component is significant. And I know there's a student in the class here who expressed an interest in a LinkedIn profile in growing into an area in data analysis. And the company came to him and offered him a really good paid internship because of a professed interest in a certain area. So I think there are a lot of tactics that you can use to communicate your desire to grow in a certain direction without already declaring yourself an expert in the field. And then there's a range of issues about how do we actually discern whether someone is faking it or not. I think that's one of the most common kind of conversation amongst young school students. Oh, he's so fake, or she's so fake. Okay, from a young age, we tend to be pretty good at figuring out when people are full of it, so to speak. But the aspirational component, locking ourselves fundamentally into a narrative about what we are to actually drive ourselves to become that, is an important element as well. We know that people who declare their fitness goals, for example, on social media are more likely to actually go jogging as they planned, because they've set themselves up for some certain humiliation. Indeed, anthropologists argues that was the whole point of marriage in the first place. Having to stand up in front of grandma and say, I do, actually was to try and discipline people to make it work. And it often doesn't. But anyway, and you find out the grandma actually doesn't care very much anyway. She only cares for your happiness. So she doesn't mind if you change your story. And that's something, a point I want to finish on. Both Adam Johns and myself know someone very well, a guy called Simon Ridings I used to teach with. And he's a very successful leader of a university in Australia now. And I'm constantly in touch with Simon. And I remember one of the first things he always said to me, always have a story, okay? Never be caught without a story. You do need to have a narrative, but never forget that it's just a story. And something I've said in one of the videos that I've just put up for this week, always be updating. Be updating your stories about how the world works. Be updating your own self-narrative in response to changing information, changing circumstances, not in a slippery, dodgy way, but just don't let your own story about how the world works and where you are in it get too divorced from reality. Because ultimately you're just going to do yourself a massive disservice. Many of the companies fail and individuals fail because they were too quick to believe their own story. You know, that it was aspirational, but they never actually made what they were saying they wanted to be. And then that came as a shock as much to them as anyone else who was a stakeholder in the enterprise. Okay, thank you very much for joining us. And it's really nice to have the Sophia and Waseda students together. We'll close the meeting and I will head down to the classroom here on the campus for those Waseda students who are here. We'll take a bit of a break and I'll be down there in 5 or 6 minutes. Okay. And it's a informal consultation session. So group members will be working together on their projects, and I'll just circulate if and when I'm needed to consult with you on the direction of what you're doing there. And Adam, on your side, you're going to be seeing some of your folks on campus?
That's right. So we have a separate Zoom session set up for you guys to go into from period 4. I will also be actually taking my laptop down to the classroom and hopefully connecting from there for an attempted high flex session that will, again, I know there's a lot of content this week, but that will hopefully just give us a bit of a chance to connect on a few issues and to make sure that we know that we're all on the same page in terms of what we need to be heading towards next week. Right, so you guys are actually not in your groups yet because I'm still waiting for a few people to feel like.
I'll just say on the Waseda side, don't be too tough on the Sophia students. It dragged on for 2 weeks longer than I intended on the Waseda side because it's so critical. You know, if someone needs to be in an online group, you can't just put them in a face-to-face group. So be speedy on that, guys. Okay, and thank you everyone who was. Right. I just, sorry, Adam, just want you primed me to mention one other thing. There is a lot of content this week. This is a full flip, okay, in the sense that we are arming you with a lot of content that would normally be delivered in a classroom context, but through pre-recorded video. I've done most of it this week, and then there'll be stuff from Adam so subsequently in the class and whatnot. And the idea is that this then frees us up in subsequent weeks to be more interactive. Okay, so not every week is going to be as heavy on in terms of out of class content, right? Content as it is this week, but particularly on the Sophia side, because this is the kickoff week really in terms of the analytics, thinking about earning attention and promotional strategy and whatnot. We wanted to give you a lot of material to start you there. And then each subsequent week is really an issues week, isn't it, Adam? It's questions of authenticity, it's discontent, it's rebranding, for example. Okay, well, thank you very much, and looking forward to the cross-institutional collaboration and seeing some great group projects being done on both sides of the institutional divide. So thank you. And
really looking forward to what you guys will be coming up with in the coming weeks. And next week we because of all this content you'll have in advance, we won't promise, but we will endeavor to give you actually more time working with each other in your breakout sessions next week as well.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Good. I think we've said all we want to say for the whole semester, right? We're happy to throw it over to everyone else. Right. Good. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Adam, and we'll talk. And I'll close the meeting down. Thank you. Cheers.